Only white people are not allowed to love themselves, love their race, and love their countries. Everyone else is. White people are the only ones who could do it. If anyone else flies a flag or says we're from wherever, or we're this color, or we're this religion, we want it, it's fine. When white people do it, it's instantly demonized. White people are the only people who are expected to give up their land.
My name is Mario, and I'm tired of the bullshit. Conservatives always say the shittiest things, especially if you're a mouthpiece for white supremacy. Now, I live in a medium-sized city, and in this city, there are Irish neighborhoods, there are Italian neighborhoods, there are Polish neighborhoods, there are Jewish neighborhoods, there are Bosnian neighborhoods, the list goes on and on. And you have organizations like the Polish Falcons and other ethnic organizations. And in these neighborhoods, you see flags on the houses from these European nations.
Europeans don't hide their crimes. They commemorate them. They don't regret empire. They sculpt it in granite, name streets after it, fund scholarships in its name, and build museums to house the spoils. Every colonial war has a parade. Europeans didn't inherit history. They burned it, not out of ignorance, but because they knew the truth would void the receipts. The truth would collapse the entire storyline, so they rewrote the narrative in powdered wigs, hiding genocides under Latin and renaming every theft as discovery. Europeans don't end empires. They abscond. They flee the scene of the crime, dressed as diplomats and humanitarians. They don't sign peace. They draft policy memos, build statues to themselves, and fly out the gold while the ink is still wet. Their empires don't collapse. They shapeshift, from gunpowder to banks.
Good people, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Awakened Africa and I'm your host, Ben. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're watching us from. It is my sincere hope that you're doing well, you're doing great. Welcome back. This is another episode, a very powerful episode today that we are going to discuss. If you're new here, welcome, you're most welcome, and if you're a returning subscriber, then big ups to yourself, right? So there is a certain clip that I saw of Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate was talking about white people white people are not allowed to raise their flags in other countries. Like, white people are always the victims. And then there is another clip of a black man who came out boldly to give an illustration of his own experience of how white people always celebrate their own countries in other countries. Then I came across clips of a white man, a very bold white man, by the way. He got banned on TikTok because of speaking the truth, how explaining how white people, they have always been the super race, being the best race, the best people in the world. They have always been at the top. They have always gone into other territories. They have destroyed the civilization. They have broken the societies, and then they come out pretending to be the victims, or pretending to be the humanitarians and philanthropists, of course. So guys, I'd like us to watch these clips to the very end, and then I will come back with my further analysis. But before that, kindly, if you're new to this channel, this is your very first time watching me, make sure that you subscribe to this channel, make sure that you like this video, leave a comment, because I like us to have the conversation going on. And don't forget to turn on post notifications, because every day I post new videos, and I like you to be the very first person to get to watch them. But right about now, guys, let us jump straight to the videos. I will be back with my commentary.
My name is Mario, and I'm tired of the bullshit. Conservatives always say the shittiest things, especially if you're a mouthpiece for white supremacy. Now, I live in a medium-sized city, and in this city, there are Irish neighborhoods, there are Italian neighborhoods, there are Polish neighborhoods, there are Jewish neighborhoods, there are Bosnian neighborhoods, the list goes on and on. And you have organizations like the Polish Falcons and other ethnic organizations. And in these neighborhoods, you see flags on the houses from these European nations. You see the fire hydrants decorated like the flags from these European nations. You see murals on the walls of flags from these European nations. You see, the problem isn't that European Americans aren't able to celebrate the heritage that they gotten from their countries of origin. That's not the problem. I mean, hell, we got the Scottish Games in certain parts of this country here. There are parades in this country to celebrate people from different European heritages. The problem is that whiteness as a racial group, as a racial category, has always been about exclusion and supremacy. This is not the same as not being able to celebrate European heritage. Usually, if white people are celebrating whiteness, it's at the expense of people of color, black folks, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, the list goes on and on. The trouble comes because your white pride is predicated upon racism, pure and simple. And this notion that Europeans are the only people who have to quote unquote give up their country is bullshit. First of all, the control and administration of these countries are always going to be European for the foreseeable future. And this doesn't matter who the prime minister is, it doesn't matter who the president is, it doesn't matter whatever head of the country there is, chancellor or whatever, because the for real power apparatus and the number of people in powerful positions in these countries are always going to be white. Now, contrast this with places like South Africa, India, and Hong Kong, where a white minority ruled those places for a very long time. They were the people sitting in all the positions of power. And even right now, as we speak, even though the head of state in South Africa is a black man, most of the powerful in South Africa are still white people. The richest people in South Africa are still white people. The people who wield the power in South Africa are still mostly white. And don't get me started on colonization. It seems to me that the only people who had to give up their country is people of color. You see the fire hydrants decorated like the flags from these European nations. You see murals on the walls of flags from these European nations. You see, the problem isn't that European Americans aren't able to celebrate the heritage that they gotten from their countries of origin. That's not the problem. I mean, hell, we got the Scottish Games in certain parts of this country here. There are parades in this country to celebrate people from different European heritages. The problem is that whiteness as a racial group, as a racial category, has always been about exclusion and supremacy. This is not the same as not being able to celebrate European heritage. Usually, if white people are celebrating whiteness, it's at the expense of people of color, black folks, Latinos, Asians, Native Americans, the list goes on and on. The trouble comes because your white pride is predicated upon racism, pure and simple. And this notion that Europeans are the only people who have to quote unquote give up their country is bullshit. First of all, the control and administration of these countries are always going to be European for the foreseeable future. And this doesn't matter who the prime minister is, it doesn't matter who the president is, it doesn't matter whatever head of the country there is, chancellor or whatever, because the for real power apparatus and the number of people in powerful positions in these countries are always going to be white. Now, contrast this with places like South Africa, India, and Hong Kong, where a white minority ruled those places for a very long time. They were the people sitting in all the positions of power. And even right now, as we speak, even though the head of state in South Africa is a black man, most of the powerful in South Africa are still white people. The richest people in South Africa are still white people. The people who wield the power in South Africa are still mostly white. And don't get me started on colonization. It seems to me that the only people who had to give up their country is people of color.
Europeans don't hide their crimes. They commemorate them. They don't regret empire. They sculpt it in granite, name streets after it, fund scholarships in its name, and build museums to house the spoils. Every colonial war has a parade. Every massacre has a statue. Every genocide heir has a stamp. Every mass theft gets filed under cultural heritage. Leopold II turned the Congo into a labor camp, where forced rubber quotas mutilated children and burned villages to ash. They gave him 17 statues, named tunnels, boulevards, and entire parks after him. Napoleon re-enslaved Haitians, re-invaded the Caribbean, and launched wars that killed millions across Europe and North Africa. France buried him under golden domes and named entire cities after him. Columbus kick-started centuries of genocide, enslavement, and biological warfare. They gave him a U.S. holiday, over 100 statues, and named entire countries and capitals after him. Cecil Rhodes massacred the Matabele people, seized land by force, and laid the foundations for apartheid. Oxford still hands out Rhodes scholarships. His name still sits on colleges, streets, and foundations. They named British destroyers after Queen Victoria, while she presided over the Indian famines that killed tens of millions. They put Edward Colston, slave trader, mass trafficker, on pedestals in Bristol until 2020. They put Francisco Pizarro, who butchered the Inca, in the center of Lima. They built Trafalgar Square to glorify a naval war that preserved slavery. They celebrate the Spanish Reconquista, a 700-year ethnic cleansing campaign with festivals, flags, and cathedrals built over raised mosques. The British Empire celebrates Victoria Day in Canada. Belgium still has Leopold monuments intact and cleaned. The Dutch still celebrate Golden Age painters who profited off the transatlantic slave trade. Portugal celebrates Vasco da Gama as a national hero, while ignoring his execution of Muslim prisoners in Mombasa. They literally celebrate Australia Day on the anniversary of indigenous dispossession. They name entire cities after slavers: Rhodesia, Georgetown, Kingstown, Jamestown, Victoria, Elmina, Port Louis. They put plantations on the back of currency. They hold royal jubilees funded by taxes taken from colonized peoples. They filmed The Crown while Britain was deporting Caribbean elders. They wrote children's books about kings' armies who starved Bengal, flattened Kenya, and torched Sudanese cities. They hung Haitian revolutionaries, then named streets after the men who sent the hangmen. They installed apartheid, then named universities after the architects. They erased the dead, then kept their teeth in museum drawers. They erased indigenous languages, then gave schools Latin mottos. They desecrated sacred land, then declared the ruins UNESCO sites. They put generals on horsebacks in town squares, men who bombed, gassed, hanged, and whipped their way across 3 continents. They call their loot collections. They call their massacres missions. They call their propaganda curriculum. They call the blood-soaked timelines the Enlightenment. They call the criminals founding fathers. They celebrate the French foreign nation born out of Algeria's colonization. They celebrate the Boer Wars, which pioneered concentration camps. They celebrate World War I without mentioning African and Asian soldiers forced to die for empires that called them beasts. They handed out OBEs MBEs, and CBEs, literally Order of the British Empire, in 2025. They still knight people in the name of empire. The British Museum, the Louvre, the Vatican, the Pergamon, the V&A, they are all crime scenes with coat checks. Their archives are full of confessions, labeled as classified. Their holidays are national amnesia rituals. Their statues are granite lies. Their textbooks are sanitized murder. Europe doesn't teach history. It curates alibi. It displays the stolen bones. It polishes the swords. It sells gift shop postcards of the crimes. This isn't collective forgetting. It's institutional pride. Europeans didn't inherit history. They burned it. Not out of ignorance, but because they knew the truth would void the receipts. The truth would collapse the entire storyline. So they rewrote the narrative in powdered wigs, hiding genocides under Latin, and renaming every theft as discovery. This wasn't documentation. It was branding. Europeans didn't study other civilizations. They studied how to erase them and still pass the test. The moment they touched a library, it caught fire. Egypt, the Rosetta Stone was looted. The nose of the Sphinx was blown off. They stood over the ruins and declared Africa illiterate. India, Nalanda, one of the world's oldest universities, torched. 9 million manuscripts vanished. Then they published textbooks claiming Europe invented math. Mesoamerica, over 5,000 Maya codices burned in church bonfires, called satanic, and then centuries later copied for European astronomy. Mali, Timbuktu had more written texts than all of medieval Europe, and France buried them in sand until African scholars smuggled them out in the dark to preserve their own knowledge from European archivists. This isn't history. This is a global arson scene, and the suspects kept the ashes. They didn't just erase, they rebranded. Algebra becomes Western math. Optics becomes Galileo's dream. Surgery, astronomy, navigation, pulled from Arabic, African, and Asian sources, stripped of origin, and resold in powdered French as the Enlightenment. They erased the Ethiopian roots of early Christianity, the Nubian queens who governed astronomical calendars, the zero-based logic of India, the land stewardship of the Haudenosaunee, the feminist inheritance of the Ibwa, and replaced it all with a montage of pale men thinking in cellars. They didn't progress. They plagiarized and pretended to be the source. The Renaissance wasn't a rebirth. It was a break-in. While Europe was still exercising women for having dreams, the Islamic world had hospitals, legal scholarship, chemistry labs, and academic peer review. And when Europe finally woke up, it did so by translating Arabic texts, texts that had already preserved Greek, Indian, Persian, and African thought. Ibn Sina becomes a father of medicine with a Latin name. Ibn al-Haytham becomes a precursor to optics, even though his work predates Descartes by half a millennium. This wasn't a rediscovery. It was relay theft, with the baton of knowledge passed through fire, and then whitewashed mid-sprint. Even their maps lied. The Mercator projection stretches Europe, shrinks Africa, and centers the world around imperial delusion. The Middle East is only middle if Europe is the sun. Western civilization includes Australia and Canada, but not Ethiopia and Mexico, even though they had alphabets before Greek even existed. They called Africa tribal and forgot Europe was governed by inbred warlords in muddy castles with no plumbing. They called Haiti violent and named cities after Napoleon. They called indigenous science myth and European mythology canon. They stole bronze from Benin, called it art preservation, and then locked it behind glass and slapped a plaque on it that says gift. Stolen artifacts were labeled generous. Massacres were called missions. Human trafficking was called trade. This isn't historical confusion. It's weaponized curriculum. The lies are maintenance. The truth would collapse the floorboards. Because if the world knew that Europe industrialized slavery and called itself abolitionist, if they knew that democratic indigenous governments were destroyed to install monarchies and puppet regimes, if they knew that Europe's civilizing missions involved famine, sterilization, language erasure, museum theft, and state-engineered extinction campaigns, then there would be nothing left to claim. No moral ground, no myth of progress, just receipts written in blood and buried under their museums. This is why their timelines start with Plato and end with Churchill. Why every world history class skips from Greece to Galileo like nothing of value happened in those 2,000 years between, unless it was white and male and drawing triangles. Europe didn't document history. It hunted it and locked it in glass. It renamed it, and when we speak the truth out loud, we get banned from TikTok. But this isn't revision. This is restoration. We're not studying Europe. We're surviving its edits. Europeans don't end empires. They abscond. They flee the scene of the crime, dressed as diplomats and humanitarians. They don't sign peace. They draft policy memos, build statues to themselves, and fly out the gold while the ink is still wet. Their empires don't collapse. They shapeshift. From gunpowder to banks. From direct rule to trade law. From chains to currency. The British Empire never ended. It just changed outfits. The Union Jack came down and the World Bank moved in. Ghana gained independence in 1957, but the British retained mining contracts, rail control, and pricing power through Anglo Gold and Barclays. Jamaica left the empire in 1962, yet Elizabeth II remained head of state. The IMF arrived with austerity, and bauxite exports flowed directly into UK smelters. They lost the colonies, but kept the economies. France pulled out of Algeria in 1962, only after 1 million deaths and 132 years of occupation. But their fingerprints remained on oil rigs, phone lines, and every Western-aligned coup from Algiers to Dakar. They left Vietnam in 1954, and within a decade were back laundering torture techniques through American advisors in Saigon. They pulled out of Haiti in 1804, after losing the only successful slave revolution in modern history, but made Haiti pay 150 million francs in compensation to French slavers, with interest, paid until 1947. Belgium never ended its rule over Congo. It just removed the flag and installed Mobutu. Trained by the CIA, bankrolled by Brussels, allowed to loot the country with Western approval as long as he suppressed Pan-Africanism. When Lumumba tried to nationalize Congo's resources, Belgium assassinated him and buried him in sulfuric acid. His tooth was kept in a Belgian drawer for 60 years, like a colonial keepsake. Germany lost its colonies in 1918, but from Namibia to Togo, they never returned the land, never paid reparations, never acknowledged the genocide of the Herero and Nama people until 2021, and even then refused to legally classify it as reparations to avoid liability. They maintained global industrial reach through companies like Siemens, Bayer, and Krupp, built on slave labor, eugenics, and resource extraction. Portugal held on to Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, and more until the 1970s. Their retreat wasn't voluntary. It was forced by anti-colonial guerrilla warfare, economic collapse, and internal revolution. And yet, the moment they left, Portuguese companies returned under post-colonial development charters. The Netherlands withdrew from Indonesia in 1949 after killing an estimated 150,000 people during the Indonesian National Revolution, and after centuries of controlling the spice trade through VOC monopoly capitalism, military force, and scorched earth famine policy. Spain ended its colonial presence in Latin America in the early 1800s, only after centuries of extermination, forced conversion, silver theft, and biological warfare. Yet even today, the monarchy celebrates its exploration legacy, while the church still holds wealth stolen from the Quechua, Nahua, and Mapuche civilizations. Even in collapse, they never gave back. They never apologized. They simply changed forms. The East India Trading Company was replaced by Shell, Unilever, and GlaxoSmithKline. Colonial governors became ambassadors. Viceroys became trade attaches. Military occupation became development aid. Cultural suppression became curricular standardization. White supremacy became secular modernity. The Sykes-Picot Agreement redrew the Middle East in 1916 like a butcher with a ruler, splitting the Levant into British and French zones, leading to a century of war, puppet regimes, border violence, and economic division. When the Ottoman Empire fell, Europe didn't stabilize it. They partitioned it. Palestine was handed to Britain. Iraq was fabricated. Syria and Lebanon became French territories. Today's chaos was built with a fountain pen at Versailles. When they left Kenya in the 1960s, the British ran mass detention camps, tortured Mau Mau fighters with castration and electric shock, and then classified over 300 boxes of colonial records, only declassifying them in 2011 after a lawsuit. They paid reparations to a handful of survivors, but kept the colonial legal codes in place. When they freed the Caribbean, they left behind monarchs, privatized sugar, and educational systems that taught about Shakespeare, but nothing about Toussaint Louverture. The Queen remained on the currency, while the people lived on IMF rations. The Commonwealth is not post-colonial. It's neo-colonial nostalgia, a club for ex-colonizers and still colonized nations to pretend empire is culture. Europe doesn't end empires. It launders them. Through museums, through curriculum, through development banks, through security agreements, through non-profits, through international law written in imperial languages. When you demand justice, they offer heritage. When you demand reparations, they offer trade deals. When you demand return of land, they say look forward, not back. But their wealth looks backward every single day to the centuries of plunder that built the banks, the borders, the universities, the crowns. Empires are not gone. They're just wearing different uniforms.
So, my people, this is something that is really heartbreaking, because it's so unfortunate and quite uncalled for to see someone who to see an oppressor trying to play the victim. Each and every person, if you didn't know, then from the clips that you've watched, you've gotten something. And I will tell you this from a first-hand experience, right? Back in Africa, we have different tribes. And from the tribe that I come from, there is a story that the white man who was talking about Vasco da Gama, everyone knows that Portuguese tried to conquer the coast of Kenya. I come from the coast of Kenya, at a place around Mombasa. My tribe was literally butchered. Tens of thousands of people were butchered by Portuguese. The people who survived, thank God that today I exist. Maybe my ancestors ran to the forest, but the people who are at the coast fishing, the people who are working in Arab farms, my ancestors were butchered by Portuguese. We know this is history. When you go to Fort Jesus, it is a fort that was built by Arabs, by Portuguese. If you go there, you will see how they are trying to hail these Portuguese. They have fabricated everything. This is first-hand information. I'm telling you as a person who has experienced it firsthand, not reading, not hearing stories. This is true. Now talk about what they did in other countries, in other colonies. Talk about now Kenya, talk about Kenya as a whole. The concentration camps, right? Kenya belongs I think the white man has explained very well that colonialism never really ended by the British Empire never ended, and that is the truth. The British Empire was replaced by the Commonwealth. These are the enemies of the British colonies, the Commonwealth, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. These are the enemies of the black people, African countries, or the other countries in South America and in Asia. The countries that still pay allegiance to Commonwealth. Colonialism never really ended in these countries. And it is really disheartening to see that white people have the guts to come out and pretend to be the victims. When we have, there is even a story back home here in Kenya. There is a story about the Batuk. Batuk is the British Army training in Kenya. The atrocities that they do to our women. They rape our women. They impregnate them and they leave them. Go to a place called Nanyuki in Kenya. That place you'll find a lot of white kids, mixed race kids. They were impregnated by the British Army, but they're still controlling our country, Kenya. That's the truth. People don't want to speak it, but that is the truth. They're still controlling they're still owning huge chunks of land in our country. Go to South Africa, it is the same story. Go to Zimbabwe, go to Ghana, go anywhere. White people, the white supremacists are still controlling. The British people are still, Europeans are still controlling these countries. The colonies left, but they still control the colonies. That's how bad things are. I'm speaking this, I'm talking about this from a first-hand experience. That's how bad things are. So when I see a white person trying to play the victim, someone like Andrew Tate saying that white people are not allowed to raise their flags or celebrate themselves in foreign countries, I really wonder, what is Andrew Tate talking about? He's just a white apologist. He's just a leftist. He's just a white apologist. He's a white supremacist too. I can say he's a racist. That's the best thing I can describe. Maybe he's a racist. Do you know what happened to Haiti? Do you know what happened in Burma? What happened in Thailand? Do you know what happened in Vietnam? Do you know what happened in Cuba, Jamaica? And then you find someone has the guts standing before a camera in a podcast talking about white people are always the victims. White people have never been the victims. They stole everything. Talk about our civilization. Who said that Africans were backwards? Who said that? Maybe I'm using a foreign language. I have my language, but I'm using a foreign language to address the masses, because when I speak English, I know a lot of people are going to get this message and they're going to understand me. Ask yourself, what did they want really? Do you know how many countries in Africa are still controlled by the European countries? Belgium is still controlling Congo. British is still controlling Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. I talk about other countries. Portugal is still controlling Mozambique, Angola. Look at how Ibrahim Traore is really trying so hard to break the chains to break off the chains of colonialism from these French masters. It is really bad. So when you see a white person coming out, crying here, talking about they are the victims, they have suffered. They have not suffered a thing. They have not suffered a thing. My people have suffered. Other people in Asia have suffered. Other people in South America have suffered. In the hands of European people, white supremacists. All these companies that you see, these big electronic companies, big telecommunication companies, they cannot survive without Africans. They cannot survive without kids getting mutilated, kids getting killed, women getting raped in Congo. Let's talk about Sudan. Look at America itself. America had an agency that supported terrorists, so they can destabilize Nigeria and pave way to steal oil from Nigeria. You know what is happening in Sudan? We know these things, white people. Stop playing the victims here. You ain't nothing close to being the victims. We live here. We live in Africa. We know what's happening. So stop doing this. This is Awaken Africa, and if this is the kind of content that you really like and enjoy, kindly make sure that you subscribe to my channel, like this video, turn on post notifications. I like us to have the conversation going on, so most definitely I'll ask you to leave a comment in the replies. Don't forget to turn on post notifications, because every day I post a video and I'd like you to be the very first person to watch them. My name is Ben. Peace out.